All right. Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a good day. This is Wasif from the CAP team, and I'll be running all of you through the debater briefing for Nepal Australs 2021. Throughout this briefing, I'll be pointing out the basic instructions that all speakers need to be uh, familiar with, and going over some key pointers that everyone should know. Before we move into the content of the debater briefing, I just want to make one quick recommendation that I strongly advise all participants in this tournament, and generally who are participating in debating, to also go through the judge manual that has been posted in the Nepal Australs page. It's going to be very helpful for debaters and judges alike. In the case of debaters, you'll be able to go through different debate scenarios, understanding of burdens, would be a bit better. And there will be helpful insights for a lot of situations in which you may have confusions about currently. Furthermore, I think just generally it's going to be a good way to understand how judges will be crediting material that you yourself present during debates. So honestly, if you're looking for a quick checklist to kind of go through things to note for the final round of preparation before you begin with the tournament, combine the debater briefing with the judge manual, do a quick run through of that before you begin the tournament. Cool. With that being said, I'll move on with the debater briefing. Let's go over the basics of the Australs format first. So generally, the Australs format, if we go through from the very top, you'll have two sides, the affirmative and the negative team, with three constructive speakers on each side speaking for 8 minutes. The reply speakers at the end will be speaking for 4 minutes, and they go in reverse order. That is to say, negative reply speaks first, followed by the affirmative reply to conclude the debate as a whole. Two important things to note here. The prep time is 30 minutes for the teams after the motions are released, and the 30 minutes includes the time for motion selection. So just note that there is no extra time for you to do the initial motion selection and then go into 30-minute preparation time. Make sure your stopwatch accounts for this. Finally, slightly different from all the other formats some of you may be more familiar with, there are no points of information in the Australs format. So no POIs, just 8 minutes of constructive speeches. Cool. Really quickly going through the roles of each of the speakers. We have the first one, the speaker, who is responsible for defining the debate, generally presenting the argument. From then onwards, we have the first negative coming up, establishing their clash, providing their basic rebuttals to the proposition team's arguments and presenting their case. The second speakers, both the affirmative and negative teams, are going to go with their own with responses to the other team's arguments, further developing their own case, running extensions, and so on. Finally, the third affirmative and third negative speakers, their responsibility is to ensure they're adequately engaging and responding, defending their own team's arguments, and finally providing the summary, the weighing, and the general method by which the debate would be finally judged as a concluding note for the judges. A version of this that is a biased adjudication is provided in the reply speeches. In these sections, you run through the contents of the round without actually presenting analysis, kind of give a run through as to why your team is winning the round and so on as a concluding note. If you move on to some further general rules and points to note after the basic idea of how the format works, there may be scenarios in which a team needs to iron person. There are a few key pointers here. Firstly, you'd need legitimate reasons. Therefore, there should be communication with the adjudication core when you are going in for an iron person, when you are going to iron person around. A maximum of 3 rounds are allowed for iron personing and that is specific to in rounds only. This is not permitted in out rounds, so a team cannot iron person in the knockout round. As a rule, a single individual cannot give 3 speeches, including the reply, if they are iron person. That is to say that it should be 2 and 2 within the speakers. In terms of how we record iron person teams, the wins are noted, and the individual giving 2 speeches gets the better of the 2 speeches as their score, and the individual who is absent gets the floor score at the tournament, that is 70. for instance. And general decency rules: please do not cheat. Um, when you are preparing, you are allowed to use printed material. Um, and quite importantly, for preparation time, do not prep as a group. Only your team is allowed to be a part of the discussion when you are going through preparation time. Very importantly, at any point in time during preparation, do not consult anyone beyond your team. If you have questions regarding the motion, consult your adjudication core. Use the features we have in the Discord channel, or reach out to the adjudication core to find any clarifications. Do not consult external material to clarify anything regarding motions. Cool. The important process when we start with the debates and the motion release is to veto motions. Necessarily, you have the power to completely veto one motion that you absolutely do not want to debate. You have the then you have the option to rank your further motions as one you like the most, one you would be okay with. So that's 1, 2, and 3. So there are usually 3 possible scenarios of vetoing. If the 2 teams have different vetos, then the only motion that remains without the veto is the one that's debated on. If there's a common veto, then you may have 2 scenarios. One of which is where you may have a common first ranking and a common second ranking, at which point the first ranking wins. If there is a cross between 1 and 2, you have a coin toss to sort that one out. Cool. That's the same process. It's helpful when you're going through the veto process if you add keywords to the motions. So in this particular set, for instance, just use the keywords. For example, this also we would ban Facebook, we would allow euthanasia, and we support children's right to vote. Use Facebook, euthanasia, and child vote as keywords. It just makes it easier for everyone to follow and really confirm that there are no errors in the motion selection phase. Let's look at the actual walkthrough of the process of motion selection. This might be a tricky technical bit, so let's really go through this in detail. So as soon as the tab is provided and released, you are to join your Zoom calls and move to your breakout rooms. The motions will only be released once all participants, debaters, and judges alike are in their rooms, in their Zoom rooms. Once everyone is in their rooms, the motion will be released in the Discord channel. You are to look at the motion. The timer will be running since the motion is released. At that point, you are to discuss with your teammates and confer with the opposing team to decide on the motions or like the vetoing process. At that point, the process is simple. Usually, you just communicate with the team that you're both writing your rankings in the Zoom chat, and then just do a countdown of 3 to 1, reveal the rankings together, and sort out which motion is selected for the round. Do note your vetoes for later. We need them for the tab as well. Finally, if there is a scenario where you need a coin toss, in that case, one of the debaters should screen share their screen and use the coin toss application to decide which motion is going to be debated on, for which I would suggest that at least one member from each team should keep some way to share their screen and use a coin toss app if it is required to save time. In the interest of that, do keep these things prepared. I hope that's clear enough for how motions are selected. Moving on to types of motions. We have a few different kinds in this format. The first of which is a basic debate about a basic value judgment debate, a debate about whether, for example, so if the general headline being X is Y, so for instance, that the monarchy is no longer relevant to being a motion. These are independent motions which are observed from a third-party point of view. In these particular kinds of motions, you are not setting a particular policy. You're not propping or counter-propping. It's simply a value judgment about whether it is the case that the monarchy is relevant or it is not relevant. This is the first kind of scenario of debates we'd have. Of course, when we refer to propping or counter-propping, the way in which things play out as the debate progresses are all part of the debate. But in general, you are not propping or counter-propping here. The second type of motion are regret motions. So these would be a simple value judgment about whether the world would have been better off with or without a particular incident taking place. These are retrospective debates. Therefore, the team that does not regret this, that is the negative team in this case, would perhaps defend the status quo, that the world that we currently live in is perhaps a good place. The affirmative team would regret this world, supposedly, and they present a possible counter world which would have been better or simply explain why the current world is terrible, um, because of X, Y, Z, and so on. So generally, you look back and uh, you retrospectively assess whether where we stand today is a good scenario or a bad scenario, is a better scenario than possible alternatives of how the world pan out. Um, so the example we look at here is that we regret the rise of the hookup culture. So this would assess what a world would without this hookup culture, much less of this culture would look like in the affirmative team versus the status quo, where the hookup culture has been on the rise. And then that's the comparison between these two worlds. Cool. We then have actor motions that as X, we would do something that is Y. So in an actor, the actor motion's unique point of view is that you evaluate from the point of view of that actor. At no point can you simply assume something in these cases that, so basically the actor needs to be well identified, their interest needs to be well aligned to have engaging debates with this regard. This can include a plethora of different ways in which the debate does happen. It could include principal obligations or specific rights, which applies to these actors. Just ensuring that no matter what you do in terms of your evaluation impacts, the effects in the world, the principal obligations and explanations are clearly linked to the interests of the specific actor. That is the most crucial thing to know about these motions, because even if you're winning an actor motion from a general perspective, another team with supposedly a lot less content, for instance, would be more persuasive if they are more specific and clearly linking their material to the actor's perspective. So that's a very important note for these kinds of motions and these kinds of debates. Then we have a prefer motion. So you prefer a world where something is happening. So you prefer a world where Z is the example here, or we prefer X over Y. So in these cases, you're just choosing between different options. So for example, we could have the motion where we prefer individuals taking multiple part-time jobs over striving for one long-term job. In these particular cases, there is at least one side that needs to reimagine the world, because these are basically envisioning a world where things would have taken place in a different way. So the affirmative in particular would need to prefer that new world. So there is a bit of visualizing what that world looks like and comparing it to why that is better than the status quo. The negative teams, however, would not prefer this world, so presumably they do prefer the current world, that is status quo. So it's always a comparison of one particular world that the affirmative team would support in this case against the status quo. It would not be between two different worlds that the negative teams can come in and counterprop and create a new world. It's not going to pan out in that way. So you compare the preferred world to the status quo. Lastly, with regards to fiat, what does this refer to what extent does this apply, and so on. Government teams, what the Fiat Rule suggests is that government teams are allowed to assume that the policy that they are suggesting will pass. The opposition cannot make arguments saying that this policy will not pass, or that the very basic elements the policy entails cannot happen. The government, having said that, the government team or the affirmative team cannot in any way assume that things will pan out a certain way as a rule of the debate. They would need to explain why things happen in certain ways, why actors react a certain way, and so on. A good example of this is in the motion that Russia should make a credible public offer to the US for joint decommissioning of their entire nuclear arsenal. The affirmative team can assume that Russia will be making this offer. Whether the US accepts this offer is up for debate. How the offer is going to be like, the terms of those offer is up for debate, and so on and so forth. So everything beyond the execution of the basic element of the motion are things that are still debated, but that's what the Fiat Rule is going to give an exception to. Finally, general tips, general courtesy notes that everyone should already be doing. So if you're in your interactions towards judges, if there is something you do not agree with, disagree with them respectfully. If you have questions for them, wait till their feedback is over. Do not badger judges while they're in the middle of their adjudication and giving you their feedback. Note that judges themselves also work very hard to give you the best possible verdicts. They're also having the same amount of dedication towards tournaments. So when you're marking judge not be vindictive, There may be instances where you are upset because the call was not what you expected. You expected something different, but do not. No individual is actually intending to hurt you in the process. They're actually just doing what they thought is justified. And in most cases, there may be differences in the way individuals are viewing debates. So that's just a general way in which this activity works. The important thing is to not be vindictive because of any particular reason when marking this. Having said that, note of the judge scoring scale. This is necessary to ensure that you are judging judges fairly, like scoring judges fairly. Um, just a quick run through. Scoring a judge of 5 would mean that these are the highest quality judges. They have a very good understanding of how the debate panned out and was quite succinct in the way they explained the nuances of the clash and how they were very clear in the way they were to identify the way in which the debate did turn with clear metrics. This is someone you want to break, possibly judge out rounds to a deep extent. Scoring 4 would be an individual who is highly recommended to chair the round. They're generally very clear, weighing and understanding the debate is fairly good as well. Their understanding of the problems within debates is good as well. The difference between 4 and 5 would simply be perhaps the degree of clarity, the degree of detail in which all of the issues are tackled or explained in their adjudication. Perhaps the level of efficiency in their OA is another factor. Also, a very high quality judge is someone who you're scoring a 4. It's someone you definitely want to chair, possibly they continue this performance break as well. Moving on to a score of 3 is someone you would think is fit to panel rounds. So while they do have the authority to, while you do think this is someone who would deserve a vote in the round, they are, it's because they are relatively clear in their description of things. They're able to track the debate all right. There is reasonable justification in the way in which teams are credited. The possible identifier of someone who's getting a 3 is perhaps the specific given for certain issues may not be as clear in their adjudication. The way in which we're crediting individuals was not always as understandable. Perhaps their tracking and the extent of detail to be able to break down the clashes and explain is not as exceptional as someone you'd be giving a 4 or a 5. Lastly, moving on to the lower scores, 2 or 1. 2 is still someone you'd recommend for paneling, but perhaps in less competitive or less tight rounds. They're able to identify the arguments, but the explanation of why the role of each of those arguments in the broader clash of the debate may not be as clear. Generally, this would be a judge who you be able to identify as someone who is kind of using the intuitions a bit more, not really using the material of the debate as much, and are not as clear in why they're crediting material the way they are. Finally, if you're scoring someone a 1, they are not fit to be given a vote. They do not weigh the debate accurately, often miss parts of the debate. These are individuals you think would be trainees for the tournament. Cool. Keep note of this when you do score judges for fair allocations. Finally, in the virtual world, we don't have the same scope of interactions. So some quick rules should be maintained for decency. Do not write things in the chat unnecessarily. That would be spamming the chat when it is often used for things like timing and so on. And it may be distracting for speakers and debaters if you start writing things like on that point here, or specifically making specific comments about arguments that you do not approve of. Those are things that are very distracting and are generally very terrible things to do in the middle of a debate. So I would suggest that refrain from using the chat unless there is an emergency that you need to convey something. Finally, final pointers. Just before we close off this briefing, no POIs, do not cheat in any way. You're not allowed to use the internet for things other than timers or pointers required. Maintain the time of the tournament. Schedules are clearly posted and instructions will be given to you clearly. And finally, give feedback on the individual who is giving the OA. You are not giving feedback on the other judges in this tournament. Cool. I hope it has a wonderful tournament. tournament in the next 3 days and the days following. Best of luck to all the teams. That's all from my end. Thanks.